someone asked Buddha, "What is karma really?" The texts tell us that after the Buddha's awakening, he sat in meditation for 49 days, experiencing the bliss of release. However, when he reported his awakening to others, his shortest expression of what he experienced was a principle of causality. Many people find this disappointing. They would like to hear that enlightenment has lots of lights and action, and they want to hear about all of the blissful and wonderful things the Buddha experienced during those 49 days. A second reason why people are disappointed by the fact that the Buddha summarized his awakening in terms of a causal principle is because causality seems very dry. It's a question of metaphysics, and many people like to believe that the Buddha avoided metaphysics and taught only psychology instead. It's true that he avoided many metaphysical questions, such as whether the universe was finite or infinite, eternal or not, but he avoided them not because they were metaphysical, but because they were irrelevant to developing the path to the end of suffering. However, there are some metaphysical issues that are relevant to the path. Because the Buddha taught a path of action, he had to teach a metaphysics of action to show how action works. His reason for focusing on this principle of causality as the most basic lesson of awakening was to show us how the mind works, and particularly, how we can use the actions of the mind to put an end to suffering. And as I explained last night, the principle of causality he awoke to is directly related to a psychologically healthy attitude toward action, an attitude that enables us both to live skillfully in general, and in particular, to master the path of action that the Buddha taught. So the metaphysics and the psychology he taught actually fit seamlessly together. Kamma and causality. Causality was a very hotly debated topic in India during his time. Some teachers taught determinism, other people taught chaos, others said that human action had no power at all. So the Buddha had to explain causality to show that human action was capable of putting an end to suffering and that we have the freedom to choose to follow the path to the end of suffering or not. We have to remember that for the Buddha, the mind is basically an active phenomenon. And his basic image for your mind's relationship to the environment is that you like to feed. You start with desire that comes from hunger. We take on a sense of becoming, which is a sense of your identity in a particular world of experience. The world here is related to whatever you want to feed on, and your sense of identity has to do with two things. One is your sense of what abilities you have to find the happiness you want. This is called yourself as a producer. The other sense of self concerns your identity as the being who is going to experience that happiness. That's the self as consumer. Both of these senses of self need to feed. The producer needs nourishment to produce. The consumer can't stand not feeding. Because the mind is proactive, we approach all experience with a question: what to do? As long as hunger is driving the mind, the question becomes, what to do in order to feed our hunger? Our intentions aim at finding an answer to that question. We want to escape the feeling of pain that comes with hunger, and we want to feel the pleasure that comes when our hunger is assuaged. We pay attention to this question, and our perceptions are shaped by it. We're doing this all the time, creating kamma this way in the present all the time, and our kamma gives results, sometimes what we want, sometimes not. Now, the Buddha's explanation of the principle of causality to explain kamma sounds very simple on the surface. It's composed of two pairs of principles working together. When this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this isn't, that isn't. From the stopping of this comes the stopping of that. At first glance, these statements seem to say nothing more than that there are causes and there are effects. That's the first impression you get. But when you look more carefully at them, taking the connected statements in pairs, you see that there are two principles interacting. The first pair is this: when there is this, there is that. When this isn't, that isn't. This describes causality in the present moment. The cause is simultaneous with the result, and when the cause disappears, the result immediately disappears. The second pair describes causality over time. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. From the stopping of this comes the stopping of that. The cause may appear and disappear at one time, but the effect can come and go either right away or much later. An example of the first kind of causality would be if you put your finger on the stove. You don't have to wait until your next lifetime to get the result. Similarly, if you spit into the wind, it's going to come right back at you immediately. That's simultaneous causality. An example of the second type of causality. When you plant a seed in the field, you won't get a mature plant right away. It will take time, well after you stop the action of planting the seed. What does this have to do with us? Our experience consists of the combination of these two principles. At any one moment in time, you will have the results of some past actions appearing. You also have your present actions along with some of the results of those present actions. From the point of view of Kamma, this means that your experience is shaped to some extent by past actions, but also by present actions. And the present actions are actually the most important ones to attend to, because you have freedom of choice concerning which actions you'll do in the present. Your past actions are like raw material for the present moment, and your present actions are the act of shaping that raw material into an experience. To compare this to food, your past actions provide the raw food, and your present actions put it in a form that you can actually feed on it. As a matter of fact, you experience your present Kamma prior to your past Kamma, in the same way that you find food only after the act of looking for it. So in this way, you have two principles of causality combining to form a causal pattern that follows some regular laws, but nevertheless allows for freedom of choice. This combination is also precisely what would be required in order to develop skills. It's because actions and their results follow a certain regular pattern that we can learn from them. It's because we have freedom of choice in the present moment that we can use what we've learned to become more and more skillful. All of this is why the Buddha never says that someone deserves to suffer because of an action. He simply says that certain actions tend to lead to certain results. But those results will also be shaped by the state of mind when those results come. If we develop a good state of mind in the present, we don't have to suffer even when encountering the effects of our bad past Kamma. If we didn't have this ability to choose our approach to the present moment, we would simply have to suffer from our past actions. And as the Buddha noted, if this were the case, no one could reach an end of suffering or gain awakening. Now, because the two different principles are interacting, they create a complex system. In physics, these are called nonlinear systems, which have many feedback loops. An example of a feedback loop would be what happens when you put a microphone connected to a loudspeaker in front of the loudspeaker. A sound picked up by the microphone will get amplified many times until it's deafening. That's called a positive feedback loop, not because it's positively good, but because it tends to intensify the original event. Another example would be a heater connected to a thermostat in the same room. When the heater raises the room temperature to a certain point, the thermostat will turn it off. When the room cools to a certain point, the thermostat will turn the heater back on. This is called a negative feedback loop. Again, not because it does anything negative, but because the two members work in different directions to keep each other in check. As we're practicing, we're going to learn that our mind has many feedback loops, both positive and negative, and we're going to try to take advantage of that fact to intensify the things that we want to intensify and to keep in check the things that would cause suffering if they got out of control. One first step in taking advantage of feedback loops comes from realizing that complex nonlinear systems actually come from many simple patterns working together. The practical lesson is that we should first learn those simple patterns and not be too concerned with the complicated ways those patterns can interact. If you're skillfully in control of the simple patterns and consistently trying to develop skill in your actions, the results, however complicated, will eventually get better and better. There may be some ups and downs, given that your past actions are still influencing the system, but the overall trend will tend upward. For example, in meditation, if you focus on the breath long enough, developing mindfulness, alertness, and ardency, you may not know when the results are going to come, and you may experience many setbacks, but you can have confidence that, given the fact that you keep trying, the results will eventually come at some time. The primary simple pattern of causality at work, in the mind and in the world, concerns moral decisions. Skillful intentions lead to pleasant results, and unskillful intentions lead to unpleasant results. This means that you can learn from your past, skillful and unskillful actions, and you don't simply approach the present moment with totally fresh eyes. You may have heard some people say that each new present moment is a unique moment, but that would mean that anything you learned from the past would be irrelevant for deciding what to do right now. The Buddha, however, says that there are causal patterns that are true across the board. If you can keep those patterns in mind, then you can know how to approach any moment skillfully. An example would be the Four Noble Truths: knowing what suffering is, what its cause is, what its cessation is, and what the path to its cessation is, and knowing also that each of those carries a duty. Suffering is to be comprehended, its cause is to be abandoned, its cessation is to be realized, and the path is to be developed. You can apply this framework to any moment in time and reap beneficial results. However, complex patterns, even though they start from simple principles, do become complex as they create feedback loops, and the feedback loops feed into one another. In particular, the complexity relative to our practice to put an end to suffering comes from the psychology of a conscious mind. Sometimes intention comes before sensory input, but it can also come after. Consciousness can come both before and after craving. But even though these facts may make training the mind complex, in the practice, we can learn how to take advantage of this complexity, because these feedback loops allow you to change your mind at many points in the system of causes and effects. Now, there are two major drawbacks in trying to master a complex system. The first is that sometimes no clear pattern is visible in the short term. Think of weather systems, for instance. Even though weather is shaped by some very basic physical principles, we all know how inaccurate weather predictions tend to be. This is because weather is a complex system. The same happens in our own minds. This is one of the reasons why we suffer from the results of our intentions, even though we don't intend to suffer, because sometimes it's very difficult to see any direct connection between our intentions, on the one hand, and the pleasures and pains we feel on the other. If lightning struck every time you did something unskillful, nobody would do anything unskillful. The problem is that often we don't directly see the connection. In fact, as the Buddha said, it's not always the case that our actions in this lifetime will yield their results in this lifetime. Sometimes their results won't even come in the next lifetime. They'll come only many lifetimes down the line. This means, of course, that we can experience the results of actions done many lifetimes ago with no idea at all of where those results come from. This not only allows us to do unskillful things without thinking we're going to suffer, but it can also drive us crazy. Some scientists once did an experiment with pigeons. With one group of pigeons, every time a pigeon pressed a green button, it got food. Every time it pushed a red button, it got nothing. These pigeons were very well adjusted. They pushed just the green button and paid no attention to the red one. With the other group of pigeons, though, if a pigeon pushed a green button, sometimes it got food and sometimes it didn't. If it pressed the red button, sometimes it got food and sometimes it didn't. These pigeons became neurotic because they couldn't trust the buttons that fed them. This is human life. This is also why, when we meditate, there are a lot of ups and downs. So, that's the first drawback of a complex system. It's because of this drawback that we need to learn Dhamma from people like the Buddha, who was able to gain an enlarged perspective that allowed him to see the patterns that we would otherwise miss. The second drawback is related to the first. Because complex patterns are so unstable and in their details unpredictable, there's no guarantee that when you change the input, the system will show the effects of your actions right away. This means that when you start practicing, there's no way of predicting how soon you'll see the results you want. Sometimes you can meditate for days, for example, and see very little change in your mind. At other times, the changes come pretty quickly. It's all too easy in the first case to get discouraged, or in the second case to get complacent. It's because of this drawback that we need close contact with the Sangha, people who have encountered the same vagaries in their practice and can give you timely help, encouragement when you need it, and warnings when you get complacent. It's in this way that the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha help us overcome the aspects of complex causality that would otherwise work to our detriment. But there are three other features of complex patterns that actually work to our advantage, if we know how to make use of them. The first deals with a feature I've already mentioned, the fact that feedback loops can be negative or positive. This gives you some control over what you do and don't want to develop in the mind. If there's a skillful quality you want to develop, you can try to create a positive feedback loop to make it stronger. This is what we do when we develop a sense of pleasure while focusing on the breath. Over time, the pleasure strengthens our concentration, and the concentration strengthens the pleasure and rapture. In this way, when they reinforce each other, they can provide nourishment for other skillful qualities in the mind as well. On the other hand, if there's an unskillful quality you want to weaken, or if your skillful qualities are getting out of balance, you can create a negative feedback loop to bring things under control. For instance, if you're thinking thoughts of lust, reflection on the unattractiveness of the body helps to bring those thoughts in check. Or if you're getting a little overcome by pleasure and rapture in your concentration, you can remind yourself to bring your focus to a more subtle level of energy in the body, and that brings the rapture under control. The second feature of complex patterns that we can use to our advantage is called scale invariance. What this means is that patterns operating on the small scale also operate on the large scale. For example, scientists sometimes can create weather patterns in laboratories, and that can teach them about weather patterns in real life. The same principle applies to the mind. If you learn how to deal with what's going on in the present moment, you learn the larger patterns of Kamma as they apply over large spans of time. And when you learn about the larger patterns of Kamma over large time scales, they can teach you lessons about how to deal skillfully with your mind in the present. In fact, that's what the Buddha did on the night of his awakening. He learned about the pattern of intention and views on the large scale in his second knowledge, and then applied that pattern to his mind in the present moment in the third knowledge. A third feature of complex patterns that we can use to our advantage is that in any complex system, the principles that put the system together can also be used to take the system apart. For example, in mathematics there is something called the three-body problem. A French mathematician, Henri Poincaré, discovered that if you trace the gravitational relationship among the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon, which is a complex system, it's possible for the Moon's trajectory to reach a point called a resonance. When it reaches a resonance, it will leave its orbit and go flying off in a direction that cannot be predicted, even though up to that point, it has been following the laws of gravity. The laws of gravity interact in a way that gets the Moon out of the laws of gravity and its relationship to the Earth. In the same way, even though our experience is created by fabrication and our experience of space and time is shaped by our actions, we can still use our actions to get outside of those dimensions, to gain release. Sometimes you hear the idea that it's impossible to reach an unconditioned dimension through the conditions created by actions, but that idea comes from understanding causality in an overly simplistic way. When we understand that causality in the mind is complex, that complex system allows us to use our intentions to get beyond intentions. This is how the Buddha's path works. Even though suffering is caused by actions of the mind, we can use actions of the mind to get beyond suffering. This is why the Buddha expressed his short explanation of his own awakening in terms of his double principle of causality. It's because our actions fall into a causal pattern that we can learn from our actions. At the same time, the complexity of the pattern allows us to have freedom of choice and to use that freedom of choice to attain the ultimate freedom. So, for a quick review of how we can take advantage of the Buddha's principle of causality. First, because complex patterns come from simple patterns, we focus on the simple patterns. We don't have to try to comprehend the whole thing. In fact, the Buddha said that if you tried to comprehend all of Kamma, you'd go crazy. But if you understand that there are certain patterns that the mind follows, and that Kamma follows certain patterns, in other words, skillful intentions lead to pleasant results, and unskillful intentions lead to unpleasant results, that's all you have to focus on. The simple patterns. Try to create as many skillful causes as you can, and learn to have some patience as the results take their time to work out. Second, about scale invariance. If you understand your mind here in the present moment, you understand the issues of becoming throughout the universe, and vice versa. This is why, when we focus on the breath right now, we're learning about principles at work in our experience of the entire cosmos. It's also why learning about Kamma on the large scale can help us in our understanding of the mind in the here and now. The third principle is that you can attain something that is unconditioned by developing the conditions of your mind. This is what makes ultimate freedom possible, and why fabricating a path to an unfabricated dimension actually makes sense. A healthy understanding of Kamma. We talked last night about how Kamma is often misunderstood and as a result often disliked. Part of the problem, in America at least, is that the teaching on Kamma is sometimes seen as psychologically unhealthy. This is because it's believed to be deterministic. As a result, the complaint is that the idea of Kamma makes people get fatalistic about their own suffering, complacent about their pleasure, and callous and indifferent to other people's suffering. But this view is based on a misunderstanding of the Buddha's actual teachings on Kamma. Tonight, I would like to show how the Buddha taught Kamma in a way that is psychologically very healthy. The first step will be to talk about what constitutes a healthy attitude toward action. The second step will be to see how the Buddha taught a healthy attitude toward action to his own son, Rāhula. And then the third step will be to draw some implications from what he taught Rāhula. To begin with, suppose you have a child. When you train your child, what principles would you want to teach the child to give it a healthy attitude to his or her own actions? The first principle would be, think before you act. Choose carefully what you want to do because your actions do have results. Some actions can be very harmful, others can be very helpful. That's the first principle, the principle of heedfulness. The second principle would be, your intentions make a difference. If the child breaks something intentionally, the punishment should be very different from when he breaks it unintentionally. The third principle would be, pay attention to what you're doing and see the results you're getting. If you see that you're doing something hurtful, stop. Further, if you see you've done something harmful, resolve not to repeat it. This is the principle of compassion. The next principle would be, admit your mistakes. If you broke something, don't say that it was already broken before you stepped on it. If you've made a mistake, talk it over. Don't be debilitated by remorse. But at the same time, don't be callous about the harm you've done. This is the principle of integrity along with truthfulness. Finally, learn from your mistakes so that you don't have to repeat them. Now, in order to teach your child these principles, you have to be a good parent too. If your child comes and says that he crashed your car, take a long, deep breath and tell him not to do it again. If you fly off the handle, your child will never admit a mistake to you ever again. So, these are the basic principles in teaching a healthy attitude toward action and toward the mistakes people make in their actions. Nobody is born totally perfect, so we have to be willing to admit the fact that we will make mistakes, but we should also be willing to learn from them. These are actually the same principles that the Buddha taught to his son, Rāhula. The commentary says that Rāhula was 7 years old when the Buddha gave him those instructions. The basic instructions are these. The first principle is to be truthful, which means not only being truthful to other people, but also being truthful to yourself. As the Buddha told Rāhula, if you feel no shame at telling a deliberate lie, you're totally empty of goodness. Truth is the basis for all progress in the life of the mind. Then the Buddha taught Rāhula how to use his actions as a way of purifying his heart and mind. First, he said, before you act, ask yourself, what are the consequences you anticipate from the action? This applies to actions of the body, actions of speech, actions of mind. If you foresee any harm from the action, don't do it. If you don't foresee any harm, you can go ahead and do it. While you're doing it, if you see that it's causing any unexpected harm, stop. If you don't see any harm, you can continue with the action. Once the action is done, you're still not done. You have to look at the long-term consequences. If you see that the action did cause harm, talk it over with someone else who has experience on the path to gain that person's perspective on what you did wrong and what might have been better to do instead. And then resolve not to repeat the same mistake again. If you don't see any harmful consequences, take pride in the fact that your practice is developing and continue trying to get better and better. When you look at these instructions, you see that they embody the 4 principles of a healthy attitude toward action: heedfulness, compassion, truthfulness, and integrity. Heedfulness in that you take the results of your action seriously. Compassion in that you don't want to do any harm. Truthfulness in your willingness to admit your mistakes. And integrity in taking responsibility for any harm that you've done. These are good qualities to bring to meditation practice as well. Other lessons that can be drawn from these instructions concerning the nature of action. What might be called the metaphysical implications of a psychologically healthy attitude toward our power of choice and the power of our actions. 1. You are free in how you choose to act. If you didn't have freedom of choice, the whole idea of teaching a path of practice to put an end to suffering wouldn't make any sense, for no one could choose whether to follow the path or not. 2. Actions have results. 3. Your intentions are important, but good intentions are not enough. You have to learn how to make your intentions skillful. This is why we have to check the results of our actions. Simply meaning, well, we can still cause harm. It's through experience, learning from our mistakes, that we learn what genuinely is helpful and genuinely is harmful. In fact, to see things in this way is the beginning of wisdom. You may remember from the first passage in the Kamma readings that the question leading to discernment is, what, when I do it, will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? The wisdom here consists in understanding 2 things. The first is realizing that happiness and suffering come from your actions, and the second is realizing that long-term happiness is better than short-term. There's a passage in the Dhammapada where the Buddha says that if you see a long-term happiness that would come from abandoning a short-term happiness, you should be willing to give up the short-term happiness for the sake of the long-term. A British translator once translated this passage into English and added a footnote saying that this could not possibly be what the passage really means because the principle is so basic that everybody knows it. Still, even though everybody may know it, not everybody acts on it, which is why the Buddha has to remind us. A fourth metaphysical implication that can also be drawn from the Buddha's instructions to Rāhula is that the results of actions follow a pattern. Otherwise, you couldn't learn from a mistake. If you do one thing today and the same thing tomorrow, but get different results, you can't learn from your past actions. However, it's because there is a pattern to actions and their results that we can learn. This pattern has two features. In some cases, you do an action and you can see the results immediately. This is why the Buddha recommends looking for the results of an action while you're doing it. In other cases, you don't see the results until a long time after. This is why he recommends checking the results of the action after it's done. Sometimes the patterns combine, so that you see the results both immediately and after a long time. As we will see tomorrow, these two features of the causal pattern are very important. The fact that they are actually two patterns interacting is what allows the Buddha's teachings on causality to avoid determinism on the one hand and chaos on the other. In other words, there are patterns, so there is no chaos. But you are free in the present moment to change your actions, which means that there is no strict determinism. In this way, the Buddha finds a middle way that allows for freedom within the patterns of cause and effect in our actions. In fact, these interacting patterns form the basic metaphysical principle on the nature of causality that the Buddha discovered in the course of his awakening. Together, they form the fourth metaphysical implication of a healthy psychological attitude toward actions. That actions have a pattern that we can learn and master, but that the pattern is not deterministic. We can use our understanding of this pattern to manipulate causes and effects in the direction we want. This pattern and its implications will be the theme for tomorrow night's talk. Finally, the instructions to Rāhula carry some implications in terms of the qualities of mind that need to be trained in order to follow this practice. The first quality is attention, in particular, appropriate attention, asking the right questions about your actions before you do them, while you're doing them, after they're done. The second quality is ardency, which is the wholehearted desire to be skillful. This grows directly from appropriate attention. If you see that something is skillful, you want with your whole heart to develop it. If you see that something is unskillful, you want with your whole heart to avoid it. This connects with the principles of heedfulness and compassion. When these two principles combine, they form the foundation of wisdom and discernment. The third quality you need to develop is alertness, the ability to see clearly what you're doing while you're doing it, and the results you're actually getting as they arise. In other words, you don't see just what you hope to be getting, you see what actually happens as a result of your actions. This connects to the principle of honesty or truthfulness. The fourth quality is mindfulness, remembering to keep asking the right questions, the ability to remember your purpose in practicing, and also the ability to remember what you've learned from past actions, where to look in the present moment, and how to handle different issues as they come up. When you combine mindfulness with ardency, they connect with the principle of integrity, in that you want to remember your mistakes and not repeat them. These four qualities are the qualities that go together in establishing mindfulness, which is the topic for tomorrow morning's talk. All of these qualities should be developed in all of your actions, which is why the Buddha's instructions to Rāhula are a good example of how to give beginning instructions in meditation. The Pali word for meditation, bhavana, means to develop, and specifically, to develop good qualities of mind. Now, this process doesn't begin only when you sit down with your eyes closed. It begins in the way you conduct your entire life, because the same mind is acting in all circumstances, whether your eyes are opened or closed. If you're dishonest in your daily life, you'll find it hard to be honest with yourself in meditation. If you're careless in your daily actions, it's hard to be careful as you meditate. As I said earlier today, having purified virtue is one of the qualities that develop mindfulness. And one of the reasons why this is so is that the qualities of mind implicated in the Buddha's instructions to Rāhula are developed through observing the precepts. To observe the precepts requires these same qualities of mind. You need to use appropriate attention to ask yourself how you will observe the precepts in your life, and in particular, what changes you need to make in your behavior to bring it in line with the precepts. You also need ardency in the wholehearted desire to follow the precepts strictly, alertness to make sure that you really are following them, and finally, mindfulness in keeping the precepts in mind. Without these qualities, you cannot observe the precepts. When you observe the precepts, you reinforce these qualities. When they're reinforced, you can bring those developed qualities into your meditation. It's important to realize that the lessons from these instructions to Rāhula go all the way from the most basic level of the practice to the highest. When the Buddha, in another context, discusses the role of emptiness as applied to concentration practice, he tells you to examine your state of mind to see where it still contains disturbance and where it's empty of disturbance. If you detect any disturbance, you ask yourself what you're doing in your concentration to cause that disturbance. When you see a perception that causes a disturbance, you let it go, in the same way that the Buddha told Rāhula to examine his actions and let go of any unskillful ones. As you follow this process of looking for disturbances and their causes and letting go of the causes, the state of mind empty of disturbance gets greater and greater. The disturbances and the perceptions causing them get more and more subtle until you finally reach awakening. This process follows the same pattern that the Buddha taught to Rāhula. Examining your actions, seeing the causes and the results in your mind in the present moment, letting go of anything unskillful. This can take you all the way to the end of the path. Several years back, when I was teaching the passage on the Buddha's teachings to Rāhula to a group of people in America, there was a psychotherapist in the group. She was teaching a mindfulness-based therapy group, and so she took the instructions to Rāhula, copied them out, gave them to the members of the group for their last session together the next day. After they had read the passage, she asked them, "What do you think of the Buddha as a teacher and a parent?" They replied, "If our parents had taught us like this, we wouldn't need you now."